Tensions are mounting in the occupied West Bank, following an escalation in deadly violence that has been described as a pogrom by Israeli opposition figures and Palestinian officials alike. The latest wave of bloodshed began when 11 Palestinians were killed and a dozen were wounded on February 22nd, after Israeli forces launched their deadliest military raid in the occupied West Bank in nearly 20 years. A few days after the Israeli attack, a suspected Palestinian gunman killed 2 illegal Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank town of Huwara. This shooting on February 26 sparked what an Israeli military official described as revenge attacks by 300 to 400 Israeli settlers, who went on a rampage in Huwara town in Nablus, shooting Palestinian residents and committing arson. Wajeh Odeh, a member of the town's council, said 30 houses were burnt and damaged, and more than 100 cars were torched by the violent settlers. Local emergency services reported attacks on several ambulances. More than 350 Palestinians were reportedly injured, while 37-year-old Sameh Akhtash was shot dead during an attack by settlers on the nearby village of Zaatara. Akhtash, who was killed in the presence of Israeli soldiers, had recently returned from Turkey, where he was reportedly involved in earthquake relief activities. The Israeli army also reported several cases of settler violence against soldiers. In one instance, a settler tried to ram a military officer with his car, but the vehicle sped away after soldiers fired at its tires. The Israeli army has come under criticism for failing to immediately stop the rioting, the worst outburst of violence to occur in the occupied West Bank in decades. According to Israeli police spokesman Dean Elstun, 8 Israelis were detained in connection with Sunday's rioting. Most of them were later released. Meanwhile, scuffles also broke out between Israeli police and demonstrators in Tel Aviv, as hundreds of Israelis protested against recent violence in the occupied West Bank and against Israel's illegal occupation. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has appealed for calm, but several politicians, including members of his ruling coalition, have praised the rampage, saying it would help deter future Palestinian attacks. Israeli lawmaker Mirav Michaeli of the opposition Labour Party condemned the rampage as a pogrom by armed militias made up of West Bank settlers. The UN expressed deep concern of the recent violence in the occupied West Bank.
He reiterates he is gravely concerned by the escalating violence in the occupied West Bank. He strongly condemns the acts of terrorism and violence in Huwara and calls for all perpetrators to be held to account.
The U.S. also called on Israel to hold settlers responsible for the violent rampage.
We expect the Israeli government to ensure full accountability and legal prosecution of those responsible for these attacks, in addition to compensation for the lost homes and property.
Meanwhile, Palestine's foreign minister, Riyad al-Maliki, has accused international actors of using their influence to shield Israel from accountability. As the unrest and violence intensified, an Israeli-American man was killed by gunfire near the occupied Palestinian town of Jericho on Monday, in an attack the Israeli army blamed on suspected Palestinian gunmen. The settler attacks in Huwara also came after a day of U.S.-sponsored Israeli-Palestinian talks in neighboring Jordan, where Israeli and Palestinian officials reportedly pledged to work to prevent further violence. At least 63 Palestinians, including children, have been killed by Israeli fire since the start of the year. During the same period, 13 Israelis were killed in attacks by Palestinians. Some 700,000 Israeli settlers live in the Israeli-occupied West Bank and occupied East Jerusalem. Most of the global community considers Israel's settlements illegal under international law and sees them as obstacles to peace. According to several rights groups, last year was the deadliest year for Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and occupied East Jerusalem since 2004. Nearly 150 Palestinians were killed in 2022, while 30 Israelis also lost their lives to violence.